Jamal Hill was weighing in on Sugar Sean versus Chito Vera. And I don't know if I could like Jamal more. I don't know if that would be possible. I feel like he does everything right. I also love his backstory that he's a basketball player. I love that he got hurt playing basketball. And I don't love that he's hurt. I love that he's in the most dangerous occupation that I know of, certainly the most dangerous sport, but that the injury came from playing basketball. All right, you know what? There's no way to make that sound good. I'm just sharing with you, like, that's interesting to me. Everything he does is interesting to me. Then he gives the belt back, and that was based on pure integrity, right? I mean, that was a code that he had within him. I don't have that same code. I'd have kept the belt. And I think he might have as well. But it was the way he got the opportunity to fight for the belt in the first place was because the champion was hurt and did not waste any time and gave it back. So when he finds himself in that same spot, he returns. I'm like, that's a cool thing to do. The whole thing. He's just a great guy, right? He appears to be a great guy. He weighed in on Sean versus Chito. And a lot of this is my interpretation based on tone. So I'm going to say in this piece a few times, here's what Jamal was saying. I think. But I got to throw that out there. I think this was my interpretation of what he was saying. And what a great guy to hear from, right? A fellow champion who is in a position of trying to defend the belt for the first time. Which is the exact same position that Sean is in. So what a great insight to get. But he did make it sound, Jamal did make it sound as though Chito Vera is the fight because of the storyline, because of that fight, because of the injury, because of the reversing of the decision by the Sugar State Athletic Commission, which wasn't recognized by all governing bodies. And he used himself. He said, look, I lost a fight to Paul Craig, and it's the only fight that I've lost. So the night that I won, had Paul beaten Johnny Walker and Paul had won, I would have fought Paul Craig. And he said, that would have done a couple of things. First off, it would have given me a chance to get that one back. Second, it would give Paul the opportunity to prove, are you really the best? You whipped me and I got the belt. It seems as though you should now get to prove that you're the best, right? And there's so many guys that have beaten the right guy at the wrong time. I mean, there's so many guys who have beaten world champions. But the guy wasn't the world champion at that time. How about when Bisping beat Anderson? Just by example. One of the great middleweight fights ever. It kicked off an entire network known as UFC Fight Pass. I mean, there was a lot on that, not to mention Mike wasn't supposed to win. So he beats not only a world champion, he beats the greatest the division had ever seen, and he gets nothing for it. Fought him for all 5 rounds, did the championship rounds. I mean, Bisping did everything, but he didn't win the world championship. Just an example where you can beat the right guy, but you beat him at the wrong time. Paul Craig is not world champion. Paul Craig beat the world champion. Chito Vera is not the world champion. Chito Vera, according to some athletic commissions, beat the world champion. I mean, it's an interesting thing. When Jamal laid out Chito versus Sean, I got the sense that he was speaking from a standpoint that Sean was not going after the hardest opponents. He was going at the guy that he has the storyline with. In fact, that exact word was used, the storyline. And Sean's a star. And Sean's going to start making a lot of money. And Sean is recognized. And Sean is a main event. And Sean's now in on participation. I mean, anything that you ever dreamed of, Sean has. If you're a fellow fighter, anything that you ever dreamed of having, Sean has. That creates jealousy. And it seems to me a narrative that Sean is after a better matchup or an easier fight. It seems to me there is a narrative that Sean is going after Chito as a way of avoiding other fights. And I have not got the slightest idea where that comes from. And if you subscribe to that narrative,
dirt.
Not only are you guilty of, I don't care about what you did for me yesterday, what have you done for me today? Not only are you guilty of that, I mean, I just have to remind you, the MMA community as a whole is putting out this narrative that I speak to. But those same folks are the ones that had the narrative that Sean's reign and run was coming to an abrupt stop the day that it was announced that he was going to fight Petr Yan. And that never changed. As the fight got closer, as the training got closer, as the interviews got put in place, as the DraftKings of the world started putting odds out, that never changed. That was a bad fight. That was a fight he could not win. That was a fight that he should not take. So when he goes out, and I do agree, I think that Petr Yan will go down. Right? If we go look at everything 4 years from now, and we ask Sean, what was your hardest fight? I think he's going to say Petr Yan. That is a terrible matchup. I agree with all of those things. It was an extremely difficult fight. I agree with all of those things. But once he did it, right, if he goes out and did it today, it's going to look totally different. He's the champion of the world. He was ranked number 10. He went up 10 spots. He was the number 10 guy that fought number 1. I mean, I would ask fellow fighters, when's the last time you took on a guy and won who is 10 positions higher than you? It's a wildly difficult thing, but that also answers the question that people are attempting to put out there of the courage and the willingness of Sean to go out and do the hardest fights. He has been in that spot, and that is what he did. That drew him into either Aljo, who is neck and neck with Dominick Cruz for the greatest to have ever done it in that weight class. I think popular opinion says Aljo. I would argue and tell you that's a pretty interesting battle on paper of Dominick Cruz and Aljo. Different conversation. But that's what he might get. Or he might get the greatest combat athlete of all time in Henry Cejudo. The Olympic champion. The world champion. The world champion. He was going to get one of them. So that right there, and the agreements and showing up that night and jumping in the cage, he didn't know he was going to be face-to-face with Henry. He didn't know he was going to be face-to-face with Aljo. He didn't know when that fight was over who he was going to be face-to-face with. We had to hear from Bruce Buffer and see where Dana placed the belt. Either way, Sean was coming in, and he was going to build business that was only 91 days down the road. That right there answers any question that you might have on Sean's courage and Sean's willingness. So now when we have this discussion, if we're having it to compliment Merab, I'm all for it. If we're having this conversation to compliment Aljo and what he's done in the past, and the fact that history says a champion, particularly when he is caught with one punch, gets an immediate rematch, I am all for it. But if we're having the conversation because we don't believe Chito is the right guy, that is wildly insulting to Chito Vera. And I'm not sure that you follow the history of Chito. I think that if you were to go off the top of your head and you were to go get a focus group of fighters and you were to say, who's the guy for Sean? It would overwhelmingly be Chito Vera. Now, it'd be a different question if you said, who do you want to see Sean fight the most? That would also be Chito Vera, but that's a different question. I'm just asking the right guy. You're aware that Chito beat him. You're aware that Chito's the only one that beat him, which means anything Sean's ever done, Chito's taken. Chito's got all those chips, right? If you ask somebody else that doesn't follow the sport as close, and then they're going to have to go and they're going to look at it on paper. They're going to see 9 in a row, and they're going to see this guy was the world champion, and they're going to see, you might come to different opinions. But this wasn't Sugar Sean's idea. By the way, there was so many people that said before the Boston fight, Sean shouldn't be in the main event. Chito should be. Chito's on the same card as Sean. Chito beat Sean. but Chito's got to jerk the curtain for Sean. So Sean is a way of dealing with that and dispelling it. Not to mention, he can be as mad as he wants at Chito. He respects Chito. And Sean also respects competition in the sport. And he saw what you saw. He saw that he's about to fight for a world title, and a guy that beat him, the only guy that beat him, is going to jerk the curtain earlier in the night. Sean saw it too and thought, if I was in his shoes, I would think that I should be given an opportunity. So Sean, prior to the fight, this is an extremely relevant detail that has conveniently been left out of everybody's memory. Sean, prior to the fight, said, I beat Aljo, and Chito wins. I will fight Chito. And if Sean would have won and quickly gone after Merab, nobody would be giving Sean credit for taking on the right guy or the number one contender, the guy that's won 9 in a row. They'd have all said he sidestepped Chito. If Sean would have called out on the microphone Aljo for an immediate rematch, said, why are you calling a guy out that you just beat? He'd have gotten no credit. So instead, the call out that you saw in the cage, which seems to be the only thing anybody's remembering, was nothing more than solidifying what he had promised the world the day before. And when you're acting as though Sean is going after a more favorable matchup, do you know what you're saying about Chito Vera? The guy who stopped Dominic Cruz? What you're saying about Chito Vera, the guy that stopped Sugar Sean? You know what you're saying about Chito Vera? The guy that had his way with Pedro Munoz, who was not an easy night out for anybody? You're directly implicating that these other guys who have had the same opportunity could beat him. You're arguing that they're better than him. I don't agree with either narrative. I think that's a very rude thing to say about Chito, who was very polite and did things a very polite way that a lot of other fighters would have refused to do. And you're using that insult as a way of attempting to question a guy who was number 10 and took on number 1. A guy who was ready to step in the ring and go face-to-face with Aljo or Cejudo, knowing it was only 91 days away. You're questioning the courage of a guy who has proven himself time and time again. I think you're missing that point. When you're going out to serve Merab and serve Aljo, I like that. Those are polite things, and those guys have very good claims to number 1 contenderships. But you're inadvertently insulting Chito Vera, and Chito does not deserve that.